Hello there Scapers, my name is Xenobilius and welcome to my Tier 92 weapon versus Tier 99 prayer analysis video. Actually really excited to be making this video because I'd been planning it for a while, and the fact that a lot of you actually asked for it at the end of my previous video where I touched upon this really motivated me to make it, and I've gotten to quite a deep level of detail, so hopefully you guys learn a lot from it. I've learned a lot making it as well, and let's get right into it. So when I'm talking about a tier 92 weapon versus a tier 90 weapon, it doesn't matter what that is as long as it's a like for like comparison. So as you can see on screen, it doesn't matter whether I'm comparing a Seren Godbow to a Nox Longbow, or a Staff of Sluske to a Nox Staff, or dual Kopeshas to Drygors, because at the end of the day they are like for like comparisons. Now there are a few exceptions to this, of course. Things like special attacks, the ZGS special attack versus the range of a scythe. Also, the AoE damage a scythe can do on multiple targets versus the lower range of the AoE damage a ZGS can do. Weaknesses. So, if a specific monster has a weakness, for example, dual Kopeshas are stab weapons. If a monster is weak to slash, would dual Drygor longswords be better instead of dual Kopeshas because of that weakness? So there are a few exceptions like I said, but on the whole, they are like for like comparisons for single way combat, ignoring special effects, ignoring AoEs. The other part to this is that most bosses do not have a weakness. So it actually doesn't matter which tier 92 weapon you use. The one exception to this that I can think of is Araxor, because there are different types of Araxor spawns, so each one has a different weakness, and for some weird reason the ranged version of Araxor has a lower defense to melee than the other two versions have a defense to their respective weaknesses. No idea why, but and as for a Slayer monster example, we have the Edimu, my favorite Slayer monster in the game of course, and it's weak to slash, which is the style that a scythe uses, which is just as well because the scythe has a huge range because it's a halberd, and why wouldn't you use a scythe at Edimu's? So apart from these and maybe a few others, it doesn't matter. The point is this comparison could be made between any tier 92 weapon against its tier 90 counterpart. Now let's get into the numbers. One quick correction I'd like to make from the previous video is that when you do the total DPS difference between the different combinations, you got to actually multiply them. So let's start from the beginning. So what I did in the previous video was I was comparing Nox Scythe and the Torment Prayer with Nox Scythe and its tier 99 equivalent. See how much better that is in terms of DPS versus Staff of Sluske and the Torment Prayer versus both. So upgrading one, upgrading the other, and upgrading both. See what the difference is. The numbers haven't changed much, but you got to multiply them because adding the percentages up doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's got to be multiplied because they're talking about two different things. So in the general case, where you have Supreme Overloads, where you have 99 magic, and where you have items that give you plus 192 ability damage from jewelry and extra stuff, you will get plus 8% DPS with a tier 92 weapon and a tier 99 prayer, as opposed to a tier 90 weapon and a tier 95 prayer. Doesn't matter what combination, like I mentioned. That is the general case. Now, before we look into each specific boss, let's have a quick check on how the hit chance formula works. So the hit chance formula is fairly straightforward before you start breaking it down. Accuracy times affinity divided by defense. Now accuracy is affected by a huge range of things, but mainly by your magic level, whether you're overloaded, which prayer you have, and which weapon you're using, amongst other things, but those are the main things. Affinity is affected by the combat style you're using versus the weakness of the boss. For most bosses, like I said, it doesn't matter. You can use any combat style because most bosses do not have a weakness. However, you can increase your hit chance by using special attacks and the Quake ability, stuff like the Statius Warhammer special and Claws of Guthix, amongst other things. As for defense, it can be split into two things. The defense of the boss, that is. First is its actual defense level, which can be lowered using prayers, tier 95 or tier 99, and the Statius Warhammer drains defense by 30%, Quake drains it by 5%, and I believe the Dominion Tower Gloves have a chance of draining it by 7 levels as well, amongst other things again. like the BGS spec can also help here. The other bit is armor rating. You can't really reduce the armor rating of a boss. That is kind of fixed and it's given for all the bosses. Some are tankier than others. So that's a basic hit chance formula. And these are some of the things that boost your damage and accuracy. Not exhaustive by any stretch of the imagination, but yeah, you can have a look anyways. So damage is boosted by things like your Berserker Maniacal Reckless aura, obviously your ultimate like Berserk, Sunshine, Metamorphosis, Death Swiftness. Also the vulnerability spell does 10% extra damage. Slayer perks, Slayer items like the Slayer Helm or Salve Amulet, Scrimshaw's Godbooks, and all that jazz. Accuracy, on the other hand, is affected also by the Maniacal Aura and its equivalents, but also by the Runic and its equivalents as well. Reaper Necklace, Nihils. Special attacks have an inherent boost to accuracy when you cast them. Ultimates also have a plus 25% boost to accuracy and other things as well. So there are a lot of things you can do to add on, but the ability damage boosts I'm going to be considering in this analysis are the following. So I believe this is probably the highest, if not the highest, ability damage boost you can get from miscellaneous items, and this comes out to plus 235 ability damage bonus if you use all these items. So that's pretty cool. Obviously you can use the ranged and melee equivalents of these as well. I'm only showing you the mage one, for example, for Serenic instead of full tectonic and so on. Remember, I'm not considering special attacks or things like scrimshaws and things like that. I'm only considering the weapon, the bonuses you see here, and maybe one or two others which I'll mention. Just to reiterate as well, the difference between T95 prayers and T99 prayers is the following. Something I didn't mention in the previous video was that your opponent's defense level is also drained as long as you keep the prayer on. In fact, it drains more and more as you keep it on for longer and longer, and that will be considered in this analysis. So over time you can get up to minus 10 defense levels off your enemy if you use tier 95 prayers, and up to minus 12 I believe with the tier 99 prayers. So I'm going to be considering that because that is quite significant, because it will affect your hit chance. Remember, hit chance depends on affinity, accuracy and defense. Before I start looking at each boss, I want to say a huge thank you to Chipapa for making a fantastic hit chance calculator on Google Sheets, and I actually used that for part of my analysis, for the accuracy and hit chance part of my analysis. And he's considered pretty much everything there is to consider when calculating hit chance. It's one of the most easy to use calculators out there, and it considers so many different things. So go ahead and feel free to use that. I thought about using the formulas to generate my own calculator, but decided that would take up years of my time and I don't have that. So I decided to use it. So go ahead and have a look. That's in the description below. In this part of the video, I've gone for the most realistic setups that you might go for, the most realistic scenarios that you'll probably encounter within a boss fight. For example, let's start off with Yakamaru. What's a realistic scenario if you're with a half-decent team? Is that the team will bring a Statius Warhammer because Yakamaru is really tanky. The team will probably Quake, and the team will probably have someone bringing a Gothic Staff, as well as vulnerability runes. So that should be the standard for a decent Yakamaru team. You probably won't bring an Ihol because you're bringing a Titan, but you will probably be bringing a Supreme Aura, and I'm going to assume you're going to be bringing a Supreme Accuracy Aura for whatever style you're using at all the bosses. So considering all these, with a tier 90 weapon and just the tier 95 curses, you will have an 88.59% hit chance, which is pretty good. I mean, it could be a lot better, but Yakamaru is extremely tanky. If you didn't have these affinity buffs, it would be so much lower. And because I've considered this defense lowering that the curses provide, you can see that the numbers change, and it's even more apparent that getting tier 99 prayers first is the way to go, because the gulf is much bigger. Before it was like 0.12% of a difference in damage, total damage, or total DPS should I say, between upgrading your weapon to tier 92 versus upgrading your prayer to tier 99. Now you can see that it's more like 1.4%, and that is pretty big. I'm not gonna lie, that is pretty big. If I was looking at that, I would immediately get the tier 99 prayer first. This is for Yaka, but as you will see, the trend is fairly constant throughout all the bosses. Now if you want to get both, you will almost increase your DPS by 10% because of the combined effect of your increased accuracy and your increased damage. Remember, I'm not considering any specific ability rotations here. This is just a general case where I'm looking at your ability damage and your accuracy. But even then, it's pretty damn accurate to what you would do in actual fact. Now, the Statius Warhammer also has a side effect which drains the opponent's defense by 30%. For Yakamaru, its defense is level 99, draining it by 30%, it rounded down as 29, so it'll take off 29 levels and get it down to level 70 defense, and that will instantly get your hit chance to above 100%. Above 100% doesn't mean anything, it basically means guaranteed hit. So you won't gain anything in terms of accuracy by upgrading your prayer or your weapon, but you will gain damage. So in this case, the differences between your base case and your upgrade case is much lower. 2.18%, 1.35% for T92 and so on. But obviously the defense drain only applies for the pool that you're on. It resets when Yakamaru jumps pools, and I'm pretty sure Yakamaru is one of the very few bosses in the game that doesn't reset its defense stat every few seconds as if it was overloaded. Therefore the defense drain actually works on it, works a treat on it in fact. Other bosses like Nex and so on reset the defense, so the Statius Warhammer spec isn't very useful there. From the defense point of view, obviously it's still very useful from the affinity point of view. Next we're going to have a look at AOD. Again at AOD, if you're going in a 7-man, the chances are you will get a +9 affinity buff using the same boost as before, probably even +10 if someone decides to bring one of the other affinity boosts. The max you can increase your affinity is 10, no matter how many different boosts you use. Using the same ability again, or the same Statius Warhammer spec again, simply refreshes your boost. It doesn't add another. So the max you can get is 10, but I'm going to assume you're going to use 9. I'm going to assume you're bringing a Titan, so no Nihil, and pretty much everything else is the same as before. Now, AOD isn't as tanky as Yakamaru. However, I'm not considering the mage version of AoE, just the main part of the fight, not the last part where it's enraged. And here you can see that your hit chance is pretty high to start with without upgrading anything, assuming you have +9 affinity of course. But when you start to upgrade, you get very, very close to 100% hit chance. And in fact, if you upgrade both your weapon and your prayer, you hit a 100% hit chance, which is awesome for the first time, huh? That is a pretty good reason to upgrade both if you're going to be camping AOD with a decent 7-man team. On the flip side though, if you have a look at the percentage difference in DPS from the base case, because you hit 100% hit chance, it's actually 101.12%, but obviously anything past 100 doesn't mean anything. I mean, you're guaranteed a hit chance. You can't be guaranteed and then some. You're guaranteed, that's it. If you're really close to 100% hit chance to start with, you upgrade and you hit 100% and go over it. That upgrade starts to become less and less useful, if you know what I mean. It's only a +8% DPS if you upgrade both your weapon and your prayer, as opposed to if you don't upgrade any of them. But for Yakamaru, of course, that was 9.46%, because even with both the upgrades, your hit chance was only 93.64%, ignoring the defense drain. Now we come to Nex. This has to be one of the hardest to hit bosses in the game, despite not being anywhere near the top hardest bosses. It's one of the chillest bosses in the game, but it's also one of the tankiest. I have no idea why, but it is. And for that reason, upgrading is very, very effective indeed. So similar numbers as before, but this time you're not going to be bringing any affinity buffs. Ranged, unfortunately, doesn't have any affinity boosts. Maybe some really obscure weapon or something, but I can't think of any right now. And therefore, your accuracy is going to suffer as a result if you're doing ranged only solos. And your hit chance, even with all the upgrades, is only going to be 86.58%. But your difference is again 9.5%. And clearly, you can see that upgrading your prayer first is way more effective than upgrading your weapon if you can only afford one or the other. Now, the chances are you're probably going to be using a Reaper necklace at Nex, just for the extra accuracy. You want all the accuracy you can get at Nex, to be honest. And if you use a Reaper necklace, well, that will improve your hit chance dramatically. Combine that with a Nihil, if you're good enough to do Nihil solo kills, which probably 90% of the solo next community is, part of the 10% that isn't, unfortunately, then your hit chances are much improved. Again, the differences between your upgrades and your base case are very similar in terms of percentage, but the end result is that your hit chance is much higher, and you can obviously increase it with things like using the sniper ability with Nightmare Gauntlets, which I still rate as one of the best updates that Jagex have brought out in the last sort of 14 months. I think it came out in November last year. That is such a good ability because it's a guaranteed hit at so many different bosses and so many different places where you need a guaranteed hit to bail you out of trouble. For example, Blood Phase at Nex when it's about to reset and siphon. So yeah, there are loads of examples where it's useful. The only thing with range, like I said, is that it doesn't really have anything that gives an affinity bonus, but to be honest, the Nightmare Gauntlets probably solved that problem. Now we come to Telos. I gotta say, this is probably the one that I'm least knowledgeable about because I CBA to try it right now, but I really have to try it at some point. Anyway, the chances are you're going to be using Mage. You're going to be using the Gothic Staff special for your +2 affinity. You'll probably also be using the vulnerability spell, but like I mentioned, it adds a constant 10% damage to everything. So it won't affect the percentage differences because the differences will stay the same. It's 10% to everything. You probably won't be using a Nihil unless you're a real pro. And of course you'll be using a Supreme Accuracy Aura. Otherwise you might as well pack your bags and go home. So in this case, your base case hit chance is 86%, and that increases up to about 90% with both the upgrades. And at Telos, you really want to be using the best items you can. So yeah, you really do want to upgrade to 90%. And again, there isn't much to say. The numbers are very, very similar. It's pretty much always 5.4% for upgrading the prayer, 3.96% for upgrading the weapon, and about 9.5% for upgrading both. So as long as you don't hit that 100% hit chance, these numbers are going to be very, very similar to each other. And the same can be said at Virago. Now, at Virago as a DPS, you're probably going to be using a Nihil and a Reaper Necklace, so that's going to increase your base case accuracy. Let's assume no one's going to be bringing a melee setup, and therefore your max affinity is only going to be 2. If you put melee in there, that's going to go up by 7, so that will be 9, but let's assume it's only 2. Your base hit chance is 80%, which is pretty low. Virago, again, is one of the tankier bosses in the game, and it only really increases to 85% with both your upgrades. Now that's not great, to be honest, but as a percentage difference, these things stay very similar. However, it is slightly lower than it was for Telos. Now the reason for this is that the more bonuses you get, the smaller the percentage difference between your upgrades. So for example, if I were to compare just upgrading and I completely ignored overloading, so my base stats were only 99, not 118, then the percentage difference would be a lot higher because the boost you get from your prayer as a percentage and the boost you get from your weapon in terms of accuracy and damage as a percentage would be higher. The more bonuses I add, the smaller the extra bit becomes as a proportion of the original bit. I know that's kind of hard to explain, but bear with me here. So what I'm trying to say is, at bosses where you're not going to be using a lot of, affinity boosts and accuracy boosts and damage boosts, those are the bosses where it's going to be more worth it to upgrade. So places like Telos, where you can't afford to be bringing all those switches, places like Nex, where you can't really be bringing a Statius Warhammer, it's not worth it, and so on. Now let's check out Rots. Now Rots is a very interesting case because most people these days use the Berserk Blood Essence and the Supreme Potions, not the Supreme Overloads, but the normal Supreme Potions, which combined can boost your stats up to a level 133, I believe, along with the prayers, of course. In fact, it's 136 because it multiplies onto your already boosted stats of 118. So yeah, 136, imagine that. That's for your base case. Now if you upgrade your prayer, that goes up to 138. And with all the normal boosts you would probably use at Rots, such as a Nihil and a Reaper Necklace, you don't have time for affinity buffs because you get like 5-second kills there. Your jewelry bonus obviously drops down a little bit because you're swapping out your God Book for a Berserk Essence and your Amulet of Swords for a Reaper Necklace. But your base hit chance is 95.79%, and that goes up to 100% when you upgrade both. So the highest you can get it up is about 99% if you just upgrade your prayer. If you upgrade just your weapon, it's 98%. If you upgrade both, it goes up to 101%, which obviously is 100%. And your difference when you upgrade both is not as high, because you cap out your hit chance. So it's only 8.1% difference between upgrading both and not upgrading either. But what would be more interesting to see is how much damage you can do with this method, given that you don't brew. Obviously, you haven't really considered one of the most important things that can't really be considered, to be honest. That is brewing up. So it's obvious here, when you brew up with normal Supreme Potions, you can't restore your stats unless you re-drink those potions. But even with overloads, they only refresh your stats once every, 10 or 15 seconds, something like that. So in between that, if you brew up too much, your stats will drop. And that's where things like having 100+% hit chance comes in handy, because that gives you like a buffer, if you know what I mean. So you have a little bit of a buffer for when you brew and still have 100% hit chance, because 130% will drop down to say 100%, and that will still be 100% hit chance even if you spam brews. So for things like that, brewing up and places where you will be brewing up a lot, maximizing your hit chance is very useful, even beyond 100%, as you don't want it to drop too much below 100 even when you brew up. Now for Magister, the standard setup that I use doesn't involve Annihil because I take a yak for keys, but they did nerf its block chance, if you like. It was really tanky. So right now you can get up to a 99% hit chance if you upgrade both, which is just about the max you can really get, because the Slayer Helm boost doesn't work there. The corruption effect does. But of course the corruption effect adds a consistent percentage to your overall damage, and it doesn't affect hit chance. Therefore it won't affect the percentage difference, as you see, which again are very similar to the numbers you might expect, having seen it so many times before. Okay, one thing to note is that for the full defense drain effect of your curses to activate, you need to be fighting a boss for a few seconds. I don't know how long exactly, but for things like a Rots where you kill it in 5 seconds, I don't think it will be that effective. In fact, it'll probably only be the minimum amount rather than the maximum amount. So the minimum, I believe, is -8 defense levels. The maximum is -12 for the prayers, whereas -6 and -10 for the torment prayers. So your overall hit chance will actually not be as high as you saw for Rots because of that fact. But yeah, I've been using the base case for all my Magister kills, and I felt like I splashed a lot more than it shows here, but that's probably because I brew up so much. Can't wait to be using Staff of Slisgate and T99 prayers. That would be like guaranteed hit chance. That would be so awesome to kill, to be honest. Anyway, that's for another video. Now the last boss I'm going to look at is my good old mate, good old buddy, good old pal, Araxor. And this guy is very interesting. So the melee and mage versions have exactly the same affinity boosts to their respective weaknesses. Now assuming you're using a Nihil and a Reaper Necklace, your base case hit chance is almost 100% to start with. As soon as you upgrade one of them, you're already at 100%, which is great, awesome. That's not even considering any affinity boosts, only the Nihil and the Reaper Necklace and the Supreme Aura, of course. Now because of this, because of the fact that you're already almost 100% to start with and you just get up to 100% with any kind of upgrade, it's not actually that worth it to get an upgrade if you're only looking to mainly camp Araxor. And if you're doing it for money, you probably want to mage it because of the Fang chance. And this isn't even considering affinity boost. So if you were using the Claws of Guthix, you probably already have almost, if not 100% hit chance to start with your 95 prayer and 90 weapon, and any upgrade won't upgrade your hit chance anymore because it can't go beyond 100. It will only upgrade your damage. And the thing about upgrading your damage is that the prayers are way more effective for that than tier 92s. So even more reason to get the prayers first. And this also happens to apply to the mage version of Araxor. So when you're ranging, although I would not recommend ranging anymore. It used to be the way to go, but right now, nope, no way. And if you're meleeing Araxor, then for some odd reason, Jagex haven't balanced it. So the ranged version of Araxor has a lower defense to melee than the mage version has a defense to range, or the melee version has a defense to mage. So yeah, you have well over 100% hit chance to start with, and any upgrades will only contribute to your damage, not your hit chance, because you can't go past 100. So if you're mailing Araxor, say you're going for the base bet, so you're mailing Araxor and you're looking to upgrade your DPS, absolutely no doubt that you should get the prayer first. No doubt at all. If you get both, fine, plus 3.57% DPS. But if you only get one, definitely get the prayer first. And remember that if you do upgrade, you're probably wanting to get Dio Capacious or ZGS, and that's gonna be a bit of a struggle to get used to because you won't have that range of the sides. So you will get meleeed as well as ranged, and in P4 you will get meleeed and maged, and you have to switch a lot quicker as well. So there are things like that to consider, but the ZGS spec is a bonus as well. So there are two sides to the story, I suppose. And last but not least, let's have a look at a Slayer monster, Edemus. Now, Edemus have a huge affinity to their weakness. They have 90 affinity to their weakness, which is slash, which happens to be the style that a scythe and a lance uses, which is just as well, because if Edemus were weak to, say, crush, then your hit chance would be much lower. Now, we're looking at some ridiculous figures here, assuming you're going to be using a Cinderbane gloves. I'm not adding the Cinderbane damage, but I'm just going to assume you're using Cinderbane gloves, Corrupted Slayer helmet, and Salve Amulet E. You have a ridiculous hit chance of 316% with just the base case. Now, if you're using the Slayer helmet and the Salve Amulet E, fun fact, you'll get 100% hit chance with just 50 attack and a rune halberd. So there you go. You don't need any more, guys. But yeah, just to extend those numbers, it goes up to 333% hit chance with 99 and Tier 92 weapon. The only Tier 92 weapon that's a slash weapon right now is the ZGS, of course. As soon as you go to one of the styles it's very strong against, you reduce your hit chance by 2/3. And this is either stab or crush. Now, assume it's stab, that's the dual Kopeshes, they're stab weapons, then your chance drops down to 111% with dual Kopeshes and Appraisal Prayer. So yeah, still above 100, you're just about safe, but yeah, diminishing returns there. Very diminishing returns. I guess the point I want to make is that for most, if not all, Slayer monsters, your hit chance will already be at 100%. So if you're looking to upgrade and you're a Slayer, then you want to upgrade your prayer first because it's way more effective than upgrading your weapon. For Slayer, that is. And the chances are for Slayer, you'll probably be using things like a scythe anyway, which doesn't have a tier 92 equivalent in terms of range. So that concludes the video. Hope you enjoyed it. It was quite long, but it took me a long time to make as well. In conclusion, what I'm going to say is that wherever your maximum possible hit chance is less than 100%, that's where you gain most value from upgrading your prayers and or your weapons. Again, prayers first, but only by a small margin. Wherever your hit chance is already at 100% to begin with and you're looking to upgrade, you won't gain as much of DPS increase, but whatever little you do gain, it's much better to upgrade your prayer. Much better to upgrade your prayer first than your weapon. So that would be the conclusion. There are lots of other things to consider, like across different styles and weapons. So for example, ZGS versus Scythe, given their advantages and disadvantages. Ascensions with the Needle Strike buff versus the Siren Godbow, which is tier 92, but it doesn't have Needle Strike. It's got a smaller range than an Oxbow, so that kind of thing comes into play as well. So there are lots of different things to consider along those lines. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you'd like me to do any of those kinds of videos where I'm comparing those things. Oh, also, I have not considered one really big thing. That is the Berserker Auras. They are extremely OP, and I haven't considered them for a good reason because I'm planning to do them in a future videos. So let me know which ones you would like first. I'll try and do them first. Place a like if you enjoyed the video because it took me forever to make. I really enjoyed making it, but it did take me a long time. So show some appreciation. If you'd like to see more of these kinds of videos, do feel free to subscribe. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. I will see you in the next one.
I'll take the pain.